let me tell you something that nobody in this space wants to admit out loud. What just happened, this thing that's been flooding every DM, every comment section, every group chat, every single corner of hip-hop Twitter and rap Reddit, it didn't just go viral. It didn't just trend. It fractured something. Something deep inside the way we think about music, authenticity, artistry, and the future of this culture. And the terrifying part? Most people who shared it and went crazy over it didn't even stop to think about what they were actually listening to. They just felt it. They reacted. They lost their minds. And that, right there, is the most dangerous thing that has happened to hip-hop in the last 10 years. We are talking about an AI-generated Kendrick Lamar diss track responding to Drake's Iceman album. And before you roll your eyes, before you click off, before you say, bro, I already saw this, I need you to sit down and actually listen to what I'm about to break down for you today. Because this isn't just a reaction video. This is an autopsy. This is a crime scene investigation. And the body on the table? It might be the entire future of the rap game as we know it. Stay right here. Don't touch that mouse. What I'm about to show you will change how you hear music forever. Hey, real quick, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the content we're building on this channel, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get into it. Here's what you need to understand before we go any further. We are not living in normal times for hip-hop. The last 2 years have redefined what a rap battle even means. We watched Kendrick Lamar drop one of the most surgical, emotionally devastating diss records in the history of the genre. We watched Drake respond, multiple times, with millions poured into rollout, production, and promotion. We watched the streaming numbers shatter records. We watched the culture take sides with an intensity that felt less like music discourse and more like a civil war happening in real time across every platform. And then something strange happened. The dust settled. Kendrick moved forward. He performed at the Super Bowl. He accepted Grammy Awards. He carried himself like a man who had already won, because by every measurable standard, he had. And Drake? Drake did what Drake always does when he's backed into a corner. He kept releasing music. He kept talking. He dropped Iceman. And embedded throughout that project, woven like a wound that refused to close, were jabs, shots at Kendrick Lamar. Not obvious, clean diss tracks. No. Subtle references. Calculated provocations. The kind of thing designed to look like he wasn't obsessed while making it absolutely clear that he was completely obsessed. And Kendrick said nothing. He went quiet. The way a general goes quiet when he's deciding whether the war is even worth continuing. And that silence, that deliberate, strategic, terrifying silence, created a vacuum. And into that vacuum walked something nobody fully anticipated. Something built not from lived experience or human emotion or years of craft. Something built from algorithms, training data, pattern recognition, and prompts. Artificial intelligence walked into the greatest rap beef of the modern era and dropped what might be the most dangerous, most talked about, most culturally significant piece of AI-generated content this year. And the people were not ready. Let me be honest with you right now because you deserve that. I am not a cheerleader for AI music. I want to state that with complete clarity before we go any further into this conversation. I have watched the AI music wave come in, and I have had serious, genuine concerns about what it means for artists, for producers, for the human beings who pour their entire lives into mastering a craft only to have a machine replicate something resembling their life's work in 30 seconds with a text prompt. That is not something I take lightly. That is not a debate I dismiss. That is a real, urgent issue that this industry is completely unprepared for. But here is the thing that I had to reckon with. I reacted to an AI-generated Donald Trump diss track. I watched it. I commented on it. I gave it a platform. So the moment I started ignoring this Kendrick AI track, I wasn't just being consistent. I was being selective. And you guys, the audience, you called me on it. Dozens. Then hundreds. Then what felt like thousands of DMs, comments, and tags, all saying the same thing. React to this. React to this. This one is different. At a certain point, continuing to ignore something this significant would have been its own kind of dishonesty. A YouTuber who refuses to engage with the biggest conversation happening in his lane isn't principled. He's just afraid. So I watched it. And what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like I'm contradicting everything I just said about AI music. But I promise you, by the time we get to the end of this video, you will understand exactly why I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and why it's actually more of an indictment of AI than anything else I could tell you. From the first line, from the very first bar, something happened in my chest that I did not expect. And I need you to understand, I was sitting there fully prepared to be unimpressed. I went in with my arms crossed. I went in with my critical hat on and my skeptic shield up. I was ready to dissect the flaws, point out the robotic cadence, laugh at the weird intonation, do the whole. Yes, see, this is why AI can't replace real artists, analysis that would have been completely valid and totally defensible. And then the track started, and the first line hit, and I had to pause, rewind, play it again, because the line wasn't just coherent. It wasn't just technically competent. It was cold. The kind of cold that makes you pull your jacket tighter even when you're inside. The kind of cold that tells you whoever fed those prompts into that AI either understood Kendrick Lamar on a molecular level or spent an insane amount of time constructing the perfect creative brief to make this machine spit something that sounds like it came from a human being with a grudge and 20 years of practice. The shot about being trapped like a PS5. Think about that for a second. That's not just wordplay. That's a reference that layers gaming culture, consumer product commentary, and the idea of being boxed in, cornered, all inside 4 words. Kendrick Lamar, the real Kendrick Lamar, has been doing that kind of layered reference work for his entire career. The fact that an AI reproduced something resembling that layering is either deeply impressive or deeply frightening, depending on where you're standing. And maybe, if we're being honest, it's both at the same time. Then came the PlayStation controller breakdown. Squares in your circle, the X in your eyes, the whole controller going through Drake's entire brand narrative. Every button on that controller mapped to a different dimension of Drake's contradictions. And I'm watching this, jaw slowly descending toward the floor, thinking, who wrote this? Because here's the question that split my brain right down the middle. Did the AI generate that metaphor on its own? Or did a human being write that verse and feed it into an AI voice generator and call an AI track? Because those are 2 completely different conversations, and the answer changes everything. But here is where it got truly interesting. Here is where the curtain slipped. And this is the moment I want you to pay the most attention to because it tells you everything you need to know about the real ceiling of artificial intelligence when it comes to authentic hip-hop creation. In one of the bars, there was a line referencing someone who predicted the future. And the punchline that followed? No, Hannah Montana. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound wrong. Hannah Montana. Disney. Child star with a double identity. You could make that metaphor work in a lazy, surface-level way. But here's what a real human being, what Kendrick specifically, would have immediately known. The correct reference isn't Hannah Montana. The correct reference is Raven. Raven from That's So Raven. Because Raven-Symoné's entire show was literally built around the premise of predicting the future. That is her character's entire power. That is the foundation of the show's premise. That is a reference that lives rent-free in the brain of anyone who grew up watching Disney Channel in the 2000s. Kendrick Lamar would have caught that. Kendrick Lamar would have said, no, Raven, and it would have landed like a precision airstrike. It would have been funny and accurate and clever and culturally resonant all at once. The AI reached for the closest Disney Channel association and grabbed the wrong one. And in that single moment of imprecision, the entire facade cracked. The machine showed you its limitation. It knows the neighborhood, but it doesn't know the streets. It can approximate the culture without actually living in it. It can generate something that sounds like hip-hop authenticity without possessing the lived context that makes authenticity real. That one bar told me more about the gap between human artistry and machine simulation than any think piece or academic paper ever could. And yet, here's the twist. That one imperfect bar was surrounded by bars that were genuinely fire. Bars that would have people going crazy if Kendrick had actually rapped them. And that is the most disturbing part of this whole situation. Let me talk about Drake for a second because that's what this is ultimately about. And let me be direct in a way that some people in this space dance around. Drake released Iceman. And throughout that album, not obviously, not in a way that creates easy headlines, but threaded through the fabric of multiple tracks are references, jabs, and coded shots that point directly at Kendrick Lamar. Now I've been saying this. I've been pointing this out. And for whatever reason, this particular truth was not getting the traction it deserved. The wave cap line. The Crips disses embedded in certain tracks. They still alive references that don't make sense unless you understand the context of the beef. Drake spent an entire album doing what Drake does best, planting landmines disguised as regular record-making, looking casual while being calculated, presenting the face of a man who's moved on while his lyrics tell the story of someone who absolutely has not moved on. And I noticed. And some of you noticed. But it wasn't generating the discussion it deserved, because the narrative around Drake at this particular moment was that the war was over and he lost. But here's what this AI track inadvertently exposed about that narrative. If the beef was truly over, if Kendrick had truly moved forward without ammunition left in the chamber, nobody would have been this hungry for a response track. The fact that an AI-generated Kendrick diss went viral the way it did, not because it was technically perfect, but because people needed it, tells you that the appetite for Kendrick to respond to Drake is still ravenous. The culture hasn't closed that chapter. The culture is sitting at a table waiting for the final course, and Drake knows it, and Kendrick knows it, and that is why Drake keeps poking even while pretending to be unbothered. The AI track was basically the internet manifesting its collective desire into audio form. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a cultural stress test revealing the emotional reality underneath the official narrative that this beef is done. Real talk, if you're locked in right now, if this analysis is hitting different, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. You're helping this channel grow, so we can keep bringing you this level of breakdown on everything happening in the culture. Now, let's keep going, because it gets deeper. Let me walk through some of the specific content more carefully, because there are bars in this track that reveal a level of precision that seems almost impossible for a machine to generate autonomously. The line about walking contradictions. The specific accusation structure that mirrors the way Kendrick built his arguments in the actual beef. The reference to 2 years later, wanting to fight after everything already got swallowed up. That's not just factually accurate to the timeline, it demonstrates an understanding of the emotional arc of the story. The shame of Drake's position. The weakness of returning to a fight you already lost. There's a moment in the track where the lyrics get into Drake's association with various artists, his alleged lifestyle contradictions, his relationship to the women around him, and the way these accusations are structured, the specific moral framing, the religious undertone. It sounds less like a machine generating bars and more like a human being who follows this beef closely enough to write a graduate thesis about it, sitting down and crafting a verse, and then pushing it through an AI voice synthesizer. And maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe the AI track we're all talking about is really a human verse processed through AI voice generation, which is still a problem, still a conversation worth having, but a completely different problem from a machine spontaneously generating intelligent hip-hop commentary. Because if a human wrote those words and the AI just performed them, then what we're really talking about isn't artificial intelligence making music. We're talking about artificial intelligence being used as a ghostwriting cover. We're talking about someone potentially more creative than they're getting credit for, hiding behind the AI label to share their actual artistic vision without taking direct responsibility for the shots they're firing. And if that's the case, then the conversation shifts from, is AI dangerous to music, to are humans using AI as a shield to say things they won't say under their own name, which is honestly even more complex and honestly even more worth discussing. Here's where this gets philosophical in a way that I think genuinely matters and that I don't think anybody in this conversation has fully articulated. Hip-hop has always been fundamentally, architecturally built on the concept of authenticity. The entire foundation, the bedrock beneath everything else. You have to be real. You have to represent your truth. You have to put your name on your work and stand behind it. That's not just an aesthetic preference. That is the moral code of the genre. That is what separates hip-hop from other forms of entertainment. The accountability. The first-person declaration. The willingness to say, I made this. This is what I believe. Come find me if you disagree. AI music, by its very nature, inverts that code completely. It takes the culture's most sacred principle, authenticity, and replaces it with simulation. It generates what sounds like truth from something that has never experienced truth. It creates what resembles vulnerability from something that is fundamentally incapable of being vulnerable. And when you use AI to generate content in the voice of a living artist, even when you label it as AI, even when you're transparent about what it is, you are playing with something genuinely dangerous. You are blurring the line between what an artist said and what an algorithm imagined they would say. And that line is not just artistic. That line is legal. That line is ethical. That line is the difference between commentary and defamation, between homage and manipulation. Now, the creator of this particular track was transparent. They labeled it AI throughout. They didn't try to pass it off as real Kendrick content. And that transparency matters. That transparency is the reason we can have a conversation about this rather than calling lawyers. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even with full transparency, the track still spread. People still went crazy. Comment sections still filled up with people reacting as if this were real new music from Kendrick Lamar. The feeling of authenticity overrode the labeled inauthenticity. And if the feeling of authenticity can override labeled inauthenticity when people know it's fake, imagine what happens when they don't know. Imagine what this technology does in the hands of someone with bad intentions and no interest in transparency. Now let me go somewhere that the rap conversation has been tiptoeing around. The streaming numbers reality. Because I think there's a fantasy that people have been entertaining about what a real Kendrick response would actually do in the current landscape, and this AI track sort of forced that conversation into the open. Here's my honest assessment. If Kendrick Lamar dropped one single response track tomorrow, not an album, not a project, just one focused, sharp, deliberate diss track in the vein of what he's been capable of, it would be the biggest streaming event in hip-hop history. Not this year. History. The demand is that massive. The emotional investment is that deep. The cultural appetite is that ferocious. And I genuinely believe the only reason Drake kept taking shots across the Iceman rollout is because he's calculating that Kendrick is too evolved, too focused on his legacy, too post-beef in his mentality to come back down to that level. Drake is counting on Kendrick's maturity as his armor. He's saying, I can keep putting little rocks in your direction because you've publicly moved on, and doubling back would make you look like the smaller person. It's a psychological chess move dressed up as casual discography. And it might be the smartest thing Drake has done in this entire saga. Because if Kendrick responds, Drake gets the attention he wants. If Kendrick stays quiet, Drake gets to keep poking. Either way, Drake wins something. The only response that truly neutralizes this dynamic is if Kendrick drops something so devastating, so final, so complete that responding to it becomes literally impossible. And the AI track, ironically, proved that those bars might actually exist. That there is ammunition left. That the public's imagination of what Kendrick could say is already terrifying. The real version would be nuclear. Let me zoom out even further because I think we're doing this topic a disservice if we treat it purely as a beef-adjacent entertainment moment. The existence and virality of this AI Kendrick track is a symptom of something that goes far beyond rap music. It is part of a seismic shift happening across every creative industry simultaneously. Music, film, journalism, graphic design, voice acting. Every single domain where human beings have historically been compensated for their creative output is now being actively disrupted by systems that can produce approximations of that output for essentially zero cost. And the specific danger in music, the specific thing that keeps me up at night about this, is that music is the art form most immediately connected to human emotion. Not just intellectually, not just aesthetically, physiologically. Music triggers the release of dopamine. Music is processed in the limbic system, the part of your brain that handles emotion and memory. When you hear a song that moves you, your body responds chemically in a way that has nothing to do with whether you know the biographical history of the person who created it. Which means that AI music, when done with sufficient technical sophistication, can trigger real emotional responses in real human beings while being created by something that has no emotions, no biography, no lived experience whatsoever. That's not just a problem for artists losing income. That's a problem for human beings, losing the ability to distinguish between art that emerged from genuine human experience and content that was manufactured to mimic the pattern of that experience. And once that distinction collapses, once people stop being able to feel the difference, we have entered territory that philosophers and ethicists and legal scholars are nowhere near equipped to handle at the speed this technology is moving. Let me break this down technically because I think it's important to be precise about what worked and what didn't in this AI track, because both the successes and failures are instructive about where this technology actually is right now. What worked? The structural mimicry is genuinely impressive. The track captures the cadence of Kendrick's punchline delivery. The density of the wordplay, the layering of references, approximates the experience of listening to a Kendrick verse in a way that goes beyond surface imitation. The emotional temperature of the performance, the controlled rage, the disappointed contempt, the sense of moral authority, these are qualities that are extremely hard to synthesize, and the track gets them partially right. The subject matter is sharp and focused in a way that suggests the human or humans behind the prompt did serious homework. They fed this machine the right context, the right vocabulary, the right emotional framework. What failed? Beyond the Hannah Montana moment I already dissected, there are places in the track where the logic of the metaphors breaks down under scrutiny. Where a line sounds good in isolation but doesn't quite connect to the line before or after it the way Kendrick's lyrics always do. Kendrick's verses aren't just collections of hard bars. They're arguments. They're structured around a central thesis with evidence and escalation and a conclusion. The AI track has moments of the Kendrick formula without fully possessing the Kendrick architecture. It's like someone who studied enough music theory to write a song that sounds like Beethoven but couldn't write a symphony, because a symphony requires the ability to sustain complex structural logic across a much larger canvas than a single impressive passage. And that is actually the most honest summary of where AI music is right now. It can produce moments that are startling in their quality. It cannot yet produce works that sustain artistic coherence at the level of the true elite. The moments of brilliance are real, but they're surrounded by connective tissue that reveals the machine's fundamental limitation. It has no experience of what it is to be a human being navigating the actual world. There was a moment in my reaction where I brought up texting somebody about a specific line. The wave cap reference. The line about putting a hole in someone's wave cap. Because here's what I clocked that I feel like not enough people were discussing in their coverage of Iceman. Drake was taking shots at the Crips in that album. Not subtle, easy-to-miss shots. Direct shots. Encoded in language that any serious student of this culture would recognize immediately. And yet the discourse around Iceman was so dominated by the Kendrick angle that those shots got absorbed into the background without generating the conversation they probably should have generated. The AI track picked up on some of this. The wave cap line, the implications about street affiliations and contradictions in Drake's posturing, which suggests that whoever constructed the prompts for this track was paying very close attention to the full text of Iceman and not just the obvious Kendrick angles. And that level of attentiveness to detail is actually what separates good exposé commentary from lazy reaction content. It's the difference between watching something and seeing it, between hearing words and understanding their implications, between reacting to what's on the surface and investigating what's underneath it. The reason I was so struck by that specific line is because it represents a dimension of this entire situation that I think is genuinely dangerous and genuinely underreported. When artists start using lyrics to take shots at gang affiliations and street organizations, you've moved well past the territory of rap beef as entertainment and into something with real-world consequences. And the fact that this was happening in plain sight on a major commercial release with barely a whisper of mainstream discussion about it is itself a story worth telling. I want to come back to something I said near the beginning because I think it deserves more space. The person who created this AI track was transparent about what it was. They labeled it as AI. They didn't attempt to deceive. And in the current landscape of AI-generated content, where deep fakes of politicians circulate as authentic news, where AI voice cloning is being used to generate fake celebrity statements, where the line between real and synthetic media is collapsing daily, that transparency is not a small thing. That transparency is actually a significant ethical choice that deserves recognition even from someone like me who has serious reservations about AI music in general. The problem is that we cannot build a functional ethical framework for AI-generated content around voluntary transparency. Because voluntary transparency depends on every single creator making the right choice every single time. And history tells us that's not how human beings operate when there's money, attention, and influence on the table. History tells us that when a technology exists that can generate enormous engagement, and the only barrier to misuse is personal ethics, misuse will occur at scale, which means we need structural solutions. Platform-level labeling requirements. Watermarking technology that persists through distribution. Legal frameworks that define AI-generated content as a distinct category with specific disclosure obligations. Hip-hop specifically needs to develop its own internal cultural norms around this, and those norms need teeth. Not just community disapproval of AI music in general, but specific, enforceable standards about when AI tools can be used, how that use must be disclosed, and what consequences follow from violations of those standards. The culture has always policed its own boundaries. It policed authenticity around ghostwriting. It policed regional authenticity. It policed lifestyle claims. It can police AI use too, but it has to actually decide to do it. Let me bring this back to the central chess match for a moment and offer an analysis that I haven't heard articulated quite this way anywhere else. I believe Drake made a strategic miscalculation with Iceman that he may not fully appreciate yet. And here's my reasoning. Drake's Iceman strategy appears to be release a commercially successful album, weave in subtle Kendrick shots throughout, claim the moral high ground of having moved on, and count on Kendrick being too evolved to respond. The theory is that Kendrick's silence equals Drake's victory in the ongoing narrative war. But here's what Drake didn't account for. The internet doesn't need Kendrick to respond to keep the story alive. The internet will manufacture its own version of what a Kendrick response would look like. It will simulate it with AI. It will generate it through fan edits, through Twitter threads, through YouTube breakdowns, and each of those simulations will only amplify the demand for the real thing, while simultaneously demonstrating that Drake's position remains indefensible even in imagination. The AI track effectively did what I suspect a real Kendrick response would do, but at a fraction of the artistic power. And if the fraction is already this devastating to Drake's image, the memes, the commentary, the shared clips, imagine if Kendrick actually said this energy, then the real thing would be geometrically more damaging. Drake has essentially been poking a sleeping lion while an AI already showed everyone what happens when the lion wakes up. That's not a comfortable strategic position. If I'm in Drake's camp right now, I'm watching this AI track circulate and I'm not laughing. I'm calculating. Because every 1,000 views that AI track gets is 1,000 people being reminded that there is a very compelling, very public case to be made against Drake that hasn't fully been made yet. Every like is a vote for round 2. And Kendrick, who seems to operate on a completely different timeline than the rest of the industry, might just be watching all of this accumulate and waiting for exactly the right moment to turn the simulation into reality. I want to close out this analysis by going somewhere personal because I think the personal stakes are actually what matter most here. I care about hip-hop, not as a commercial product or a content category or a streaming metric. I care about it as an art form with a specific history and a specific function in American culture and a specific relationship to truth-telling that goes back to its origins. Hip-hop was born as a response to conditions that other art forms weren't equipped to address. It gave voice to experiences that the mainstream media was actively ignoring. It created a space where the most marginalized people in the most overlooked communities could articulate the full complexity of their reality with precision and power and unapologetic specificity. That origin story matters. It matters because it explains why authenticity in hip-hop isn't just an aesthetic preference. It's the entire political and moral foundation of the art form. When rappers say, "keep it real," they're not talking about fashion or slang or street credibility in some superficial sense. They're talking about the duty to represent truth accurately. The duty to say what actually happened, what actually feels like, what actually matters to the people who lived it. And artificial intelligence, by definition, by architecture, by fundamental nature, cannot fulfill that duty. It cannot represent a truth it has never lived. It cannot feel what it has never felt. It cannot honor an experience it has no access to. So when an AI-generated track goes viral in the context of hip-hop's most significant cultural moment in years, what we're really witnessing is a collision between the culture's foundational values and a technology that is structurally incapable of honoring those values. And the fact that it still generates engagement, still creates emotional reactions, still captures part of the experience, that's not proof that AI has mastered hip-hop. That's proof that the algorithmically optimized output of systems trained on decades of authentic human expression can approximate authenticity at a level sufficient to fool people who are moving too fast to stop and ask the crucial question: where did this actually come from? Here is where I land after all of this. The AI Kendrick track was impressive enough to be unsettling and flawed enough to be instructive. The Hannah Montana moment alone is worth an entire semester of AI ethics coursework. The viral spread of it tells us more about the unresolved emotional tension around this beef than it tells us about the quality of the content. The transparency of the creator was commendable in a landscape full of bad actors. And the whole experience made me want to hear an actual Kendrick response more than anything I've watched or listened to in recent memory. But more than any of that, more than the specific bars, more than the Drake analysis, more than the AI debate, what this moment illustrated is that the human beings who create real music from real experience still matter more than we are sometimes willing to say out loud in an age that worships technology. Kendrick Lamar did not become one of the greatest lyricists alive because he had access to powerful language models. He became what he is because he grew up in Compton and absorbed everything that meant. Because he watched things happen to people he loved and translated that watching into art that made millions of strangers feel less alone. Because he spent decades obsessing over craft in a way that required him to be present, vulnerable, flawed, and human in ways that no machine has ever been and no machine will ever be. That's what the AI got right in the moments it got right. The patterns of greatness. But the patterns of greatness aren't greatness itself. The map is not the territory. The imitation is not the thing. And hip-hop, despite everything, despite the algorithm worship and the streaming count obsession and the AI music revolution bearing down on the culture like a freight train, hip-hop still knows the difference. Deep down in its bones, in the part of the culture that cannot be trained away or simulated into submission, hip-hop knows what is real and what is a very convincing lie. And that knowing, that deep, collective, inherited cultural discernment is the thing that will determine whether this art form survives what's coming.
So yes,
I watched the AI track. I went crazy for a few bars and caught myself. I noticed the Hannah Montana miss. I felt the hunger for the real version. And I came out the other side more convinced than ever that when Kendrick Lamar decides, if Kendrick Lamar decides that it's time to say something, nothing that any AI has ever generated or will ever generate is going to be able to prepare Drake or anybody else for what that actually sounds like. Because a machine can learn the language of greatness, but it cannot become great. And in the end, that difference is everything. But here's the thing I haven't told you yet. Here's the reason you should stay locked into this channel for the next few weeks. Because there are real, credible whispers from sources that have been accurate before, suggesting that Kendrick's silence is not permanent. That the accumulation of shots across Iceman has not gone unnoticed, uncatalogued, or unanswered in the permanent sense. That somewhere in the machinery of one of the most precise, calculated, patient artistic minds in the history of this genre, something is being prepared that makes what that AI generated sound like a rough draft. A first attempt. A demo. And if that moment comes, when that moment comes, this channel is going to be exactly where you need to be. Because we are not going to just react. We're going to break it down line by line, layer by layer, reference by reference, until every single dimension of what just happened is fully understood. That is what this channel is built for. That is the promise I make to everyone who sits down with me for content like this. So subscribe. Not as a favor to me. As an investment in being the most informed person in the room when the biggest moments in this culture happen. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Because when the real Kendrick drops, and it's going to drop, you are not going to want to find out about it from someone else's reaction. You want to find out about it here. You want to process it here. You want to understand it here. We'll see when it happens. Stay ready.